My teen daughter said, "Honestly, you're just bitter because mom upgraded." I quietly got up, took the car keys, and left. The next morning, she had no ride to school and found out who had been covering their rent. I, 42M, thought I had prepared myself for the worst when my ex-wife left me 3 years ago for her coworker. What I hadn't prepared for was my own daughter turning into a weapon against me. The divorce had been brutal. She had cleaned out half our savings, taken the house and the settlement, and somehow managed to paint me as the villain in our daughter's eyes. My 17-year-old had chosen to live with her mother, visiting me every other weekend like I was some distant relative she barely tolerated. Last Friday, she was supposed to spend the weekend at my apartment. I had planned something special, tickets to see her favorite band, the same group we used to listen to during our Saturday morning pancake breakfasts when she was little. I thought maybe, just maybe, we could reconnect. Instead, she spent the entire evening on her phone, rolling her eyes at everything I said. When I suggested we cook dinner together like we used to, she informed me that her mother's boyfriend was a much better cook and that his kitchen was actually modern, unlike my sad little apartment setup. I bit my tongue. I had been biting my tongue for 3 years, watching this man step into my life, my house, my role as a father figure. He drove my daughter to school in his BMW, took her shopping at expensive stores I couldn't afford, and somehow managed to be the cool parent while I scraped by in my one-bedroom apartment, sending most of my paycheck in child support and alimony. Saturday morning, I made pancakes anyway. She picked at them with disgust, comparing them unfavorably to the breakfast her mother's boyfriend made, some elaborate French toast with imported maple syrup. I asked her about school, her friends, her plans for college. She answered in monosyllables, her attention glued to her phone screen. That evening, I finally brought up the elephant in the room. I told her that I missed her, that I felt like we were growing apart, and that I wanted to understand why she seemed so angry with me all the time. I explained that the divorce wasn't something I had wanted, that I had fought to keep our family together. She looked up from her phone for the first time all weekend, and what I saw in her eyes wasn't the little girl who used to fall asleep on my chest during movie nights. It was pure contempt. She told me I was pathetic for still being upset about the divorce. She said her mother had explained everything, how I had been holding them back, how I lacked ambition, how her boyfriend was everything I wasn't. She listed his accomplishments, his corner office, his expensive car, his ability to provide the lifestyle they deserved. Then came the final blow. She said, with the casual cruelty that only teenagers can master, that honestly, I was just bitter because mom had upgraded. She said it like she was commenting on the weather, like she was stating an obvious fact that everyone already knew. I sat there for a moment, letting those words sink in. Upgraded. Like I was an old phone that had been replaced by a newer model. Like our 15 years of marriage, our family, everything we had built together, was just a rough draft for the real thing. I stood up quietly, walked to the counter where my keys were sitting, and picked them up. She asked where I was going, but I didn't answer. I simply walked out of my apartment and drove. I ended up at a 24-hour diner downtown, the kind of place I used to take her when she was little and couldn't sleep. I ordered coffee and sat in our old booth, thinking about how I had gotten to this point. How the man who used to read bedtime stories and chase away monsters had become the villain in his own daughter's story. That night, I made some decisions. Sunday morning, instead of driving her back to her mother's house as planned, I called my ex-wife and told her that our daughter would need alternative transportation. My ex demanded to know what was wrong, but I simply said that some arrangements would be changing and hung up. My daughter was furious. She accused me of being petty, of punishing her for telling the truth. She called her mother, who immediately tried to guilt me into driving over there. But I had already made up my mind about what upgrade really meant. Monday morning arrived, and my phone started ringing at 7 a.m. It was my ex-wife, panicked because their car wouldn't start and her boyfriend was out of town on business. She needed me to pick up our daughter for school. I told her that I was sure she could figure something out. After all, she had upgraded, right? The calls continued throughout the day. My daughter had missed school. They had tried calling a taxi, but the cost was astronomical for the distance to her private school, the same private school I had been paying for with money I couldn't really afford. Tuesday, the same thing happened. Their car was still in the shop, and her boyfriend was still traveling. My ex-wife's tone was getting more desperate. She asked what I wanted, what this was really about. I told her it was about respect. It was about my daughter understanding that the man she so casually dismissed as an upgrade victim was the same man who had been quietly holding up the pillars of their comfortable life. Wednesday morning brought a different kind of call. It was my daughter, and her voice had lost its usual edge. She asked if I could please pick her up for school, that she was sorry for what she had said. But I wasn't done yet. I told her that apologies were good, but understanding was better. I asked her if she knew how much her private school cost per year. She didn't. I asked if she knew who had been paying the difference between what her mother received in child support and what the school actually charged. She was quiet. I asked if she knew who had been covering the gap in their rent after her mother and her boyfriend had moved into that expensive apartment in the nice part of town. She said she thought her mother's boyfriend paid for everything. I told her to ask her mother about the monthly transfers I had been making to her account, the ones that went well beyond what the court had ordered. I told her to ask about the college fund that I had been contributing to, even though it meant I couldn't afford to move out of my studio apartment. I told her to ask about the car insurance, the medical bills, and the dozen other expenses that the upgrade apparently couldn't quite cover. Thursday, my phone stayed quiet until the evening. When it finally rang, it was my daughter again, but this time she sounded different. Smaller. She told me that she had talked to her mother, that she was beginning to understand some things she hadn't known before. She said she was sorry, but the apology sounded hollow, like it was coming from someone who was sorry they had been caught rather than sorry for what they had done. I told her that sorry wasn't enough anymore, that for 3 years, I had been the easy target, the one she could blame and dismiss while I quietly made sure her life stayed comfortable. I told her that if she wanted to continue living in the world where I was the failure and her mother had upgraded, then she needed to understand what that world actually looked like without my contributions. Friday brought a call from my ex-wife. She was angry now, accusing me of manipulating our daughter, of using money as a weapon. She said I was being petty and vindictive. I asked her if she had been petty and vindictive when she had spent 3 years poisoning our daughter against me. I asked her if it had been petty when she had allowed our child to develop such contempt for the man who had been supporting them both. I asked her if it had been vindictive to let me become the villain while she and her boyfriend played house with money I provided. She threatened to take me back to court to have the custody arrangement modified. I told her that was fine, but she might want to consider how it would look to a judge when they discovered that I had been paying far more than the court-ordered amount, and that I had been doing it voluntarily to ensure our daughter's comfort and stability. Update 1. It's been 2 weeks since this all started, and things have been shifting in ways I didn't expect. My daughter missed 4 days of school before my ex-wife finally swallowed her pride and called me directly. She asked what it would take for me to stop this nonsense and resume helping with transportation and the extra expenses. I told her it wasn't nonsense. It was a learning opportunity. During this time, I had been doing some research of my own. I discovered that my ex-wife's boyfriend, the supposed upgrade, was actually leveraged to his eyeballs. The BMW was leased, the expensive apartment was stretching their budget, and his corner office came with a salary that was impressive but not nearly as substantial as they had made it seem. More importantly, I learned that my ex-wife had been telling our daughter for years that I was bitter and jealous, that I couldn't accept that they had moved on to a better life. She had never mentioned that this better life was partially subsidized by my voluntary contributions. My daughter finally came to see me last Saturday. She arrived by bus, looking tired and humbled in a way I hadn't seen since she was small. She said she wanted to talk. I made pancakes. She told me that the past 2 weeks had been eye-opening. Without my financial help, her mother and boyfriend had been struggling to maintain their lifestyle. The boyfriend had started making comments about expenses, questioning why they needed such an expensive apartment, why my daughter needed to attend private school. She said she was starting to understand that the life she thought was evidence of an upgrade was actually being supported by the man she had dismissed as a downgrade. I told her that understanding was a good start, but that trust would take time to rebuild. I explained that for 3 years, I had felt like a stranger in my own daughter's life, that I had been reduced to a weekend obligation and a source of resentment. She cried then, really cried, for the first time since she was little. She said she didn't know how to fix what she had broken between us. I told her that acknowledgement was the first step, but that actions would matter more than words going forward. Update 2. A month has passed, and the dynamics have shifted significantly. My ex-wife and her boyfriend broke up 2 weeks ago. According to my daughter, The financial pressure and the reality of their actual situation had been causing problems for months. When he realized how much of their lifestyle depended on my contributions, he started questioning everything, including whether he wanted to be in a relationship with a woman who was still financially dependent on her ex-husband. My daughter has been staying with me more often, not because she has to, but because she says she wants to get to know me again. She's been asking about my childhood, my dreams, the things that used to matter to me before I became just a support check in her life. We've been cooking together again, and she's started to appreciate the small apartment she once dismissed. She told me that she realized the difference between a house and a home, and that the expensive apartment never felt like home because it was built on pretense rather than genuine connection. She's also started to understand the sacrifices I made. When she learned that I had been living in a studio apartment while paying for her private school and her mother's lifestyle upgrade, she was genuinely shocked. She said she had never thought about where the money came from, just assumed that adults had infinite resources. I've agreed to resume helping with some expenses, but with conditions. My daughter has to maintain a relationship with me that's based on respect rather than obligation. She has to understand that my support is a choice I make out of love, not something she's entitled to regardless of how she treats me. More importantly, we're going to family counseling together. She agreed to this after I explained that I needed help understanding how she had developed such contempt for me, and that I wanted to make sure it never happened again. Update 3. 3 months later, and I'm writing this from a different place emotionally. My daughter and I have developed a relationship that's more honest than anything we had before the divorce. She's living with me half the time now, by choice, and we've established traditions that are ours alone. Saturday morning pancakes have returned, but now she makes them with me instead of reluctantly eating what I provide. She's also started working a part-time job, not because I demanded it, but because she said she wanted to understand what it meant to earn money and contribute to her own expenses. She's saving for a car, and we've been looking at used options together. She told me that she doesn't need a BMW, that she just wants something reliable that she can call her own. My ex-wife has had to downsize to a smaller apartment and has been struggling to adjust to her new financial reality. She's asked me several times to increase my support, but I've maintained my position. I pay what the court ordered, plus I contribute to specific things for my daughter, school, medical expenses, and activities we agree on together. My daughter has started to see her mother more clearly too. She's realized that the poison she had been fed about me came from her mother's own insecurity and financial dependence. She's also noticed that her mother has started dating again, always looking for someone who can provide the lifestyle she wants rather than building something meaningful. The most important change is that my daughter now understands the difference between someone who provides for you and someone who simply spends money on you. She's learned that the man who quietly sacrificed his own comfort for her well-being was actually the one who loved her most, not the one who tried to buy her affection with expensive gifts. She told me recently that she's proud to be my daughter, something I hadn't heard in years. She said she understands now that the upgrade her mother thought she had found was actually a downgrade in every way that mattered. Sometimes the most powerful lesson you can teach someone is what life looks like without you in it. My daughter learned that the man she had dismissed as bitter and unsuccessful was actually the foundation that her entire comfortable life was built on. And sometimes, the best way to show someone your worth is not by fighting to prove it, but by quietly stepping back and letting reality speak for itself. The revenge wasn't in hurting them. It was in teaching them the truth.